just want to welcome you to the Friday Night Lecture Series. It's sponsored by the Scandinavian Heritage Foundation and the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures here at Portland State. Before I say anything else, I want to say that all the chairs and the tables and everything else has been wiped down personally by Marian and Carl Thompson. Who else?
Margaret Imperial help.
Margaret Imperial help. Okay, because we don't want you to come back later and say you got the swine flu from having. I just want to say that. Okay, so tonight the speaker is going to be Erik Brakstad, who's sitting over there ready to go. And I just want to say he's not new to this lecture series. He actually had his debut right in this room 10 years ago in 1999. And in 1998, I was here for the Scandinavian Sampler, where they have small lecture series, and I was sitting over there, and he gave this wonderful lecture. I'd never seen him before, and I thought, gosh, we can use him for this lecture series. And as soon as he was finished, he packed up his papers, ran to the door. And I'm not a very aggressive person, but I read I wanted to nail him for this. And just as he was reaching the door, I got him and said, could I have your phone number? And he looked very perplexed. He thought, what does he want? So anyway, we teamed up and he's given 3 or 4 lectures here, and they've all been absolutely wonderful. So he's become a part of our lecture series here. And I remember the first lecture he gave was, once you cross the Atlantic, you are always on the wrong side. And that's what foreigners feel when they come over here. You have one foot here and one foot there. Now, there's more to Erik than just that. Let me just tell you a few facts about him. He grew up in Bremerton, Washington, and after high school he spent 1 year in Norway in a folk high school. That's very much the vogue in Scandinavia to go to a folk high school. And it's very popular, and it was of course started by the Danes and things. And then later on he came back and he went to Reed College, graduated from Reed College, and now he's a self-employed building contractor, of all things. All his life, Erik has participated in Norwegian language camps, a total of 20 summers. Imagine, I think you're really older than we think you are. 20 summers. And for 3 years, he has been a camp director at Hometown in Europe, an English language camp in Switzerland. Erik has a 6-year-old daughter, Siri, a Norwegian name, and also a son, 3 years old, called Sten. And now I will leave the rest to Erik, because tonight he's going to tell us about his grandfather's prison camp diary. So let's welcome Erik Brakstad.
Thank you for the largely accurate introduction there. That was good. And well, my daughter's name is very Norwegian. My father called me up after my son was born and informed me that Stan is not a particularly Norwegian name. And
but it's Danish, so that is okay.
It's more Danish and Swedish than Norwegian, as my father. And my father really isn't like this. He's not your most flag-waving Norwegian, but naming things brings out a certain side. And, but anyway, I'd like to think that Sten is a citizen of the world, and like the Scandinavian Heritage Foundation, it's kind of ecumenical, inclusive towards things Scandinavian, so we don't get too hung up on that. Well, thanks for coming. I'd like to start with reading a 2-sentence letter that my grandfather signed in 1942, and this was a letter that had these 2 sentences. It says, I find that I can't go along with the education of Norway's young people along the lines laid out by the Nasjonalsamling. That's the Norwegian Nazi party. It goes against my conscience. If membership in the Norske Lærersamband, the Norwegian Teachers Union, requires adherence to the educational agenda articulated, I must announce that I cannot contemplate being a member of the letter Samba. And then he signed his name, Edvard Brakstad, and put it in the mail on Friday, February 20th, 1942. He didn't write the letter, he signed it. And he was one of thousands of Norwegian teachers who wrote the same thing, the same sentence, signed their own names to it, and then sent it in. And in fact, I don't have the exact numbers, but in the high 90% of all the Norwegian teachers did this, from elementary school, middle school, and higher levels, gymnasium. And it was very well orchestrated, synchronized, underground thing for them to do. Posted on Friday, so the letters had Friday, Saturday, Sunday to come to their address to Seter, the National Samling, the Minister of Education. So on Monday, there were 4,000 letters waiting for him, and the next day there were 600. There were 600. They came streaming in from all parts of Norway. It was an utter and complete surprise to the Nazi officials, and they didn't know what to do. So I'll get back to this, and let me back up and just state, I think with this crowd, I don't think I need to explain World War II, that there was a World War II, who was on what side. So, I mean, since there are crowds where you have to go through that. I don't think this is that crowd. But Norway was invaded on April 9th, 1940. It was a surprise. There was resistance. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but the king escaped, went north, and then went to England. The Allies landed troops in a couple places, Åndalsnes and Nordic. There was fighting that went on until early June, and then they withdrew, and then the overt armed hostilities went underground, and there was resistance on different levels. My father was 20 years old when the Germans invaded, and he came here and gave a slideshow with some of his pictures. I don't know how many years ago. Where's Åsa? How many years ago was that? I don't know.
Your father was here, but I was in Alaska then, so I didn't get the lecture.
Okay,
I'm sorry about that.
7 years ago.
Yeah, something like
how many
that,
people
yeah.
here heard him do his thing? Okay, there were a number of people. So he gives a very personal story of his experience during the war, and he saw, there was some conflict in his town, Eidsvoll, which is 1 hour north of Oslo, and he saw the Norwegians fleeing north. There were some skirmishes outside the town. He and a buddy cycled out there, and they saw a shot-up German truck, and they saw dead bodies, people blown up, German soldiers, that is. And then he saw, that afterward they blew up the bridge in town. And anyway, my dad gave an account of that, and it also can be found on the internet, his description of that. But I'm not here to talk about that so much as my grandfather. And my grandfather was a teacher. He was born on a farm and was one of, I don't know, something like 11 or 12 siblings. And he was a top-notch farm worker. He was very valued on the farm. And as family legend has it, when he decided that he wanted to go to school, they wanted nothing of it. They wanted him working on the farm. And family legend has it that he took some farm implement and broke it over his leg to signify how serious he was about going to school. He had to shoot some animals and sell their skins for some kroner to pay for his tuition that year. Anyway, he did become a teacher. They did become proud of him. He was the first one that had ever gone to school. And at the time of the war, he was an instructor at the Landsgymnas. How would you call that? Kind of a high school, a boarding school, from students from all over the country to come and educate themselves. And he believed greatly in this. So the Germans invaded in April 1940. In all accounts I read about this and what I hear, the Germans really felt that they could win over the Norwegian populace. That if they would just explain their cause, and they had stories about that there was the English, Jewish, capitalistic oppressors, and the Norwegians should unite after all their, the same Aryan stock, and that, things would, it would come around and it would be part of the 1,000-year Third Reich, but didn't quite turn out that way. And my dad describes what it was like when, in the first year in the war, there was a German officer that came to live in their house. And my dad says he was a nice man, well-educated man, and was polite around the house, but he was utterly frozen out in the family. Nobody would speak to him, and I, seen as this was the leading way to show hostility in the house that I grew up in, I can only imagine what it was like for them. School was back in session by the fall of 1940, and my dad was a student there. My dad and my grandfather was a teacher. But there was a lot of turmoil there. There were some Nazis in Norwegian society. There were some Nazis among the students. They were called HID, and they wore special uniforms. It was kind of modeled along, the Hitler Youth. And my dad says it wasn't too bad at his school, but at some other schools they would get really argumentative and cause commotion, challenge other students, challenge the teachers, but that wasn't such a big deal there. And the Germans were still trying to win over the hearts and minds. And one of the things they did in 1940, winter 1940 and 1941, was they would have a national sports day. Norwegians like skiing. We'll have a ski race all over the country. And so they had a ski race going around and then coming back to the school. And before the finish line, all the students stopped there and in a field, and they just refused to go on, and they sang the Norwegian national anthem and the patriotic songs, and the Germans had nothing to do but just call the whole thing off. And those of you who saw my dad's slideshow, he has a slide that he took of that, all lined up there and just standing there. But political parties in Norway were disbanded in September 1940. The local governments, school boards effectively disbanded in January 1941. Most unions, including the teachers' unions, and cultural organizations were disbanded in summer of 1941. And then the teachers' union went underground, and you'll hear more about how important it was that they kept the lines of communication in going underground. The Storting, that is the parliament, was effectively shut down, and the plan was to replace it with what the National Samling, the Norwegian Nazis, called the Riksting, and that was going to be built on building blocks of the unions and other organizations in the schools, but it didn't quite turn out that way. But really the reform of Norwegian society was going to follow along what they did in German society, and key to that was the educational system. And they needed to totally revamp the educational system and get the Norwegians along with the program. So here's a little clip, if you will, from a press conference held by Edvard Brakstad. He was the head of the National Samling Teachers Union. And I think of Hitler up there doing his thing, so I'm not going to do a Hitler impersonation, but it's like, the teachers shall now prepare for the momentous task in the new state, and Norges Lærersamband, the new teachers union, is the instrument to educate and lead the teachers in the direction they must go, so that they can fulfill this important duty for New Norway. anyway, so he's all spouting off this kind of thing, but you know, early on, there were the seeds of opposition on different levels, and I read about that first summer that there was a group called Female Academics, is what it's translated as, in Oslo, and they had held an underground meeting, and the German experts there wanted to learn from what happened in Germany, how the Nazification through the schools, through the clergy, through Hitler Youth, how that happened there. They wanted to make sure it didn't happen in Norway. They talked about that one of the ways that good Germans got co-opted into the agenda was that they felt isolated and that they didn't have the economic means to withstand. So, you know, for the good of their families, they didn't stand up. And so early on, they were aware of this, and that idea spread, so that when arrests did happen later, people didn't have to worry about their families, their kids, not having the economic means to survive. I also read a stirring example early on from Lærde High School, a teacher's training school, where the big exam, Norwegian universities are very exam oriented, it's all the exams, so they're having their big exam, and at the end of the exam, when they hand it in, the applicants, the students are given a one-page thing where they have to state their willingness and loyalty to join the Notsee Teachers program. And so they didn't have time to talk to each other. This was a complete surprise. But again, the vast majority of them refused to go along with this. And this was important too, because as things escalated, the Germans realized that they didn't have a whole bunch of younger teachers to just fill the position of the people they wanted to fire. And that complicated things. And so they tried to set up kind of a crash course of teacher training. And their plan was to have 500 students trained in a 3-month program, so they could get 2,000 a year. But for that first program, only 20 signed up for the first course. And then after a few days, it was down to 17. So that didn't go anywhere. So anyway, there's, not to get into a blow-by-blow here, but there was an escalation which led to this letter that I started off with. And after that letter hit home on the Monday after and throughout, the Nazis had a dilemma, because they had to react, and they decided it was time to crush the Norwegian teachers once and for all. And so on February 23rd, they sent out word that those teachers who sent in that letter, they had to retract it, or they would get fired. Didn't work. None of the teachers did it. And February 24th, not unrelated, bishops, Norwegian clergy, had sent in a similar letter about a week before. They got relieved of their position for the rest of the war, actually. And then it was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The arrest started on March 20th, so that's about a month after the letter. And you know, my grandparents' family heard about it, and then they thought maybe it won't come to Oslo, because you know, there were over a week passed, and then you know, on April 1st, a deputy from the sheriff, a Norwegian, came to my dad's door, and they gave my grandfather a few minutes, just grabbed a toothbrush, a couple things, and they took him away. And anyway, I wonder what it was like for my grandfather. I didn't know my grandfather very well, but the language that he spoke, other than English, was German. He was a historian, and strangely enough, he was well, not strangely. It was typical of Germans, of Norwegians, to look to Germany for as their cultural and historical role model. He had studied in Germany for a year in, I think, around 1920, before my dad was born, and that was, as I understand, the big year of his life. He was in Germany. He very much respected German history and culture, and to be carted off by them must have been a real shock. Anyway, my dad and grandmother and my aunt, they didn't hear anything for a couple months, although there were rumors and underground messages, and so they found out that the teachers that were arrested, and there were about 1,000 that were arrested in the aftermath of the letter. They were taken to Grini, outside of Oslo, which was the largest concentration camp there. They were there for some time, and the descriptions of them, having them stand in line and having to hear all this rhetoric and trying to break them down, get them to sign the thing. A few did, but the vast majority stood up to the pressure. And one can imagine the Germans didn't really know what to do with them at this point. And so they, as we found out later, as my dad found out later, they were put in cattle cars, and then they were shipped north of Lillehammer, which is a couple hours north of Oslo, 3 hours north of Oslo, where the Olympics were, of course. And outside there, they were put in a former army barracks, and they were there for 12 days. And their conditions were rough. It was still cold out. There was snow on the ground. And again, they tried to break them down, show them a rough time, give them very little food, and do things like, when they get there in the rail car, it's like, you got 2 minutes to go line up over here, and then they rush over there, and then they wait for hours, in the middle of the night, that kind of thing. But it's all just part of the, the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen, don't know where you're going to go, speculation, the anxiety that goes along with that. So the majority, after 12 days, were sent. Were packed, I think, to Trondheim, and then put on a boat and sent north. And there, the conditions were really rough. It was, they were packed into a boat with room for 250 life preservers, for about that many, berths for about half of that, 125. But again, there were over 500 people on there. And this is where even a Nazi doctor that came and checked in on them on their voyage northward, protested, said, this is too much. But of course, they didn't really know where they were going to go, and there's much speculation. My grandfather was not amongst them. He took a later ship called Finnmark, was the name of the ship. And there were only 144. So they had more room, and their conditions weren't as bad. But this book that I pried out of my dad's hands has lots of personal descriptions written after the war by survivors, and there's a lot of drawings in there too, descriptions of the privations on board the first ship, which is called the Kjærstad. And nobody died, but by the time they got up to Kirkenes, which is above the Arctic Circle at the very top of Norway, they were tired, many were sick, and it was part of the plan, I guess, to try and break them down. When they got to Kirkenes, they were taken to a prison camp where they were taken over by the regular German army, the Wehrmacht, when they'd been under the thumb, if you will, of the SS before then, and it was a lot better under the under the Wehrmacht. I read, it was, of the 1,000 arrested, they were all men. And I read that there was a complaint from one of the Nazi officials in the district who was disappointed at this because where he was, the women were the worst because the women signed the letter too, but it was just the men that were arrested there. Okay. You know, not surprisingly, my grandfather didn't talk about this much after the war, and I didn't even know about the diary until 6 or 7 years ago. My dad was like, yeah, I have this diary that your grandfather kept when he was interned. I'm like, what? You didn't tell me about it? Oh, you had all these, he's like, oh, it's not very interesting. It's just writing about, you know, it's how hungry he is, and it's depressing. And of course, I was very interested. And of course, you know, it's obvious to me why my father wasn't interested in that he later in the war spent 14 months in Gdynia after being arrested by the Germans, and it just reminded him of that, and he doesn't like to talk about it. So the diary was written pen or pencil in a notebook, and it's pretty legible, at least to my dad. I had a hard time with it, but he read it off and into a tape, and I helped transcribe it and retranslated it. And I'm going to read some things there. Of course, it was strictly forbidden to write in a diary, but again, this was the German regular army presiding over this, and the teachers were, I think they were given a lot of leeway. They really wasn't anywhere to escape to. They were allowed to have, there's talk about them having knives, whittling things. They whittled each other presents for their birthdays, and I've got a napkin holder that my grandfather got there. So you can see in there that he writes some daily description stuff, although it's interesting to speculate on what he left out. There's a lot of names that he left out. Anything if the diary was found would implicate someone, get you in trouble. That's not in there. But there's also several letters that were in there, at least one of which was unmailed, and so I'm going to mix those in to the diary. So here's from one of the letters. It's Dear All Three. As you've probably heard, we are on our way northward. We don't know for how long. Things have been much better than one could expect, considering where we came from. I am tanned and strong, and have in many ways had experiences that I definitely wouldn't want to miss. Our spirits are high, and we're part of something big. The trip up Gudbrandsdalen, a valley in central Norway, was in a way a unique experience, although we did not exactly travel first class, crammed into cattle cars. We are now aboard a boat and are more comfortable. Take everything calmly, keep your strength and belief. We're probably facing big changes and happier times. Take care of the garden and the house as best you can, and then we'll all do what we have to do, each in our place. I've had strength and peace of mind up to now, and I hope that will last. My companions are unusually fine people, many good old friends. I cannot write more under these circumstances because of regulations. Live well, all of you. My thoughts, again and again, go to you. Hopefully we'll meet before too long, so now I get a chance to see North Norway after all. I don't think he'd ever been up North Norway. The weather here is great. Our neighbors asked me to send their greetings. All my love, Father. And that sign-off reminds me of a joke. Did you hear the one about the Norwegian that loved his wife so much that once he almost told her? My wife thinks that's really funny. Okay, the next one is from Edvard at Kirkenes, June 7th, 1942. This is a letter. We arrived here on the 11th of May, live in barracks, 14 men in my room. Great guys, all of them. We managed the trip well, good weather, interesting to see North Norway. It's been cold so far, but I've been healthy the whole time and have managed everything quite well. Work outside, usually road work and other outdoor work. Edvard is about 9 kilometers from Kirkenes. was at the Finnish border one day, because it's up there. It's really close to the Finnish border and Russian border. I mean, it is way up there. Things are all right. You need not worry about me. Hope we will be released sometime during the summer. What is uppermost in our minds is concern for you back home. Be calm. We'll meet again before too long. Greet friends. Write clearly and only about things that concern us, because of the censors. With all my love, Edvard. And the first entry in the diary is May 24th. Slush. 60 to 70 horses outside our barracks. They came from Finland. Stomping and noise, muddy all around, not very pleasant here today. We woke up early, around 6 a.m. One group went to work at Kirkenes. My thoughts go home. Her birthday, that's his wife, my grandmother Olga, and memories from her birthdays, the children, and everything that goes with home. It was not easy to get through this day. May 25th, milder weather, the horses have gone. A big drinking party in the German barracks beside us. A quiet day for most of us, but work for some at Kirkenes. The biggest thing that happened was a letter read aloud from our leaders in Oslo. It's obviously an illegal letter smuggled in from the leaders in Oslo. And the points, he writes out the points of the letter. They are following closely what is happening to us. Our families get all the financial help they need. 663 clergymen have resigned. 70,000 civil servants have written protests against the Samband. The schools, for the most part, are in session, although teachers have not signed the loyalty pledge. Plans for the Riksting, that was the Nazi parliament that took the place of the Storting, will be dropped. The youth mobilization also dropped, and the teacher Samband will probably also be dropped. There is feverish activity to secure our freedom. People are praying for our safety. And then he writes, the letter caused a quiet optimism amongst us. It is common belief that we might be let free fairly soon. Our action has brought about big results. May 29th. No big happenings these days. The weather has been, for the most part, good. People think that we'll be free soon, maybe as soon as the 1st of June. I think we must be prepared for a longer stay up here. Yesterday, there were air raid alarms and bombing in Kirkenes. There were a lot of bombing going on there. They were unloading German ships, sometimes with munitions or fuel or different supplies, and there were Russian bombers and anti-aircraft guns going off and stuff like that. I am going to Kirkenes tomorrow to work at 6:30 a.m. Just about everybody's going. Nessa tried to steal sausages from the Germans, was caught and beaten up. The Hauptmann, commander, gave a speech at roll call about it. It's a shame the way this is handled. Yesterday I did unloading, working for the first time on the DS Hallingdal. Unloaded gasoline and oil for the Wehrmacht. Relatively easy work. I got some fish for dinner, some flatbread, and a couple of cups of soup. Last night was a beautiful night. The sun was streaming into my bed at 2:15 in the morning. This is above the Arctic Circle, land of the midnight sun. 2 or 3 times during the night, there was bombing close to where the teachers were in Kirkenes. Yesterday, there was a short air raid alarm. We had to stop working for a while. We saw Russian planes up high. Anti-aircraft guns were shooting. We took it calmly. One gets used to everything. Yesterday and today, there have been many rumors circulating, particularly about the trip home. Some think that we're going home tomorrow. Not very likely. I've talked to others about being prepared for the worst, that we'll be here most of the summer, but the wish to go home is strong. A quiet Sunday today, fine weather, spring is here. The leaves are getting ready to come out. I've been homesick today. Not much for food, a very sparse dinner, a piece of fish and some soup. I've lost 2 kilograms since I came here. I always feel hungry and weak. There will be minor bickering once in a while. We're all a little petty, and that is seen sometimes. Grabbing things for yourself is a strong drive in people, just as in animals. Food and concern for food is deeply seated, and it's hard to keep these drives within decent limits. Yesterday evening, we were given a salmon, and everyone got a piece. It tasted wonderful. And he talks about this, and not surprisingly, a lot of his diary entries are about food, but he talked about he's given food by the local populace, and they're you know, all kinds of food, and it's a big help. And this is interesting in that, like a lot of countries, there are geographical rivalries, and between southern Norway and northern Norway, certainly it holds true there. But it's also, the teachers talk about how much they appreciated the local populace and the food, also smuggling messages. And in the introduction to this book, Kirkenes came out in 1946, right after the war. And again, it's an assembly of pictures and essays and writings and poetry and songs that the teachers put together in this book. The introduction is just a stirring dedication to the people of Kirkenes and Finnmark. And all proceeds from the book went to them in 1946. And you have to understand that at the end of the war, 1945, the Germans, as they withdrew, had orders to burn every single building in northern Norway, and they did as they went south. So when the Russians came from the north, they wouldn't have anywhere to live, and so they did this with ruthless efficiency. And so you can imagine that they wanted to pay something back to the populace. Anyway, enough bread spread, marmalade, canned goods, sausage, sugar, and liver paste. There is quite often herring, but in spite of this, we seldom feel we've had enough. In the middle of June, they moved into tents, and then the weather was good for a while. Great weather the last few days. Yesterday morning, I got up at 5, sunned myself, and washed my entire body, got coffee, and had breakfast. A magnificent morning. It is amazing how fast things can change here in the north. Now it is full summer, and the leaves are almost fully grown. We've stayed around the tents and sunned ourselves. This is really just vacation living. So far, we like it better here, that is in the tents, than the barracks. As long as the good weather holds, it's great. Steady work yesterday and good food and good news. We wish the war would get to an end soon. Last night, I woke up people at the tent at 11:30. The sky was clear and the sun was bright as during the day. Many got up, we climbed up on a hill and stood there, very moved, for half an hour. A wonderful sight. Just a few kilometers from us, people are killing each other. Then on June 23rd, he writes, and that's Midsummer Day, which is a big deal for northern folk. Bright sunshine, work has gone well. Road work, dinner was good, fish and soup. I felt almost full. Afterwards, I sunned myself, long and well, naked. The weather was mild, like southern Norway at this time. The evening meal was good, and I felt as if I almost had enough. 1.5 herring, plus herring paste, and marmalade. A well-rounded meal, I guess. Chewed down some powdered sugar afterwards. That helped fill us up. Dessert, I guess. At roll call, it was announced that our colleagues at Kirkenes are going to move up here. They will work on the airfield, 320 men. In all, 390 men are needed. We will fill in the gaps. Not pleasant to think about. The rest of us will work on the roads. When that was known, many were rather discouraged, but I don't think this changes anything to do with the time we will be left free. It is Jonsok, midsummer. In Norway, memories and feelings come streaming on. Thoughts about those at home and sadness that summer is passing while we're here in captivity. The summer we've dreamed about during the long, cold winters. Now the best of it will pass while we're separated from our home and loved ones. But we pull ourselves together and keep calm. We are fighting for our people and for our freedom, our country, and our children. For humanity. And we're hoping for better times. I hope things are going well back home, so I live with the hope that I will see my family before very long. We can stay up till 10 this evening. We might go out and see the midnight sun tonight. And later he writes, Jonsok, midsummer, evening was outstanding, clear, and beautiful. Almost everybody in our tent came out. The sun remained for some time above the hill to the north. A strange atmosphere, an unusually beautiful color tone over the sky and the countryside. The lakes and the fjord were very strong blue. the leaves and the grass intensely green. A melancholy feeling possessed us. We sang quietly a couple of verses of our national anthem. And then we had to go back to our tents and captivity again. Okay, then he writes about work. I worked on the road, hard work, and a lot of shouting and harassment. Extremely unpleasant atmosphere, but we take it calmly. July 15th. This day too passed without anything happening as far as the trip home is concerned. It is uncertain as ever. We had hoped that this would be the day of return. Now we hope that something will happen before the 31st. Some think it's going to be the 20th. It came like a cold shower for many when it was announced at roll call that the sick people would be picked out and sent home soon, but only the sick ones. An application was sent for the rest to be included. As I see it, nothing has changed as far as our situation is concerned. And there's an account here when the sick were allowed to go far before the others. They had to sign an allegiance to the National Samband. And they decided to do it, and then they were separated, and they sent a message to the main group, and were worried about what they would think about that. And then the main group decided absolutely that was fine for them to do that. They were sick. And then they started to debate the merits of what happens when they are given the same offer. And there's both cases are lined out in great detail, but they talked about it, and then they had a vote, and they voted that yes, they would sign it. And at this point, they felt that they had won what they had wanted to win, and they knew they had messages from what was going on in the rest of Norway, and so they decided to do that. And okay, July 17th, Svare, Notsee, and I got a pack of cigarettes each from Dr. Punterwald in Kirkenes today. These are the three from my grandfather's hometown, his fellow teachers who were arrested at the same time. They were good pals of his, and they shared this experience. That was the first pack of cigarettes I've had since I came north. As far as food is concerned, it is just barely enough. I often feel weak and listless, and I think that my weight is holding up fairly well. We received some oatmeal today. It tasted wonderful. We had a free day and rested well. But despite that, feeling weak this evening. I should have mentioned before that a piece of shrapnel landed close to the tent a couple of days ago during an air raid. And the same day there was a rather intense bombing in Kirkenes. The tea house, T stands for something, I don't know what, belonging to relatives of Foggy was blown away. A lot of damage was done to German storehouses, ammunition depots, and workshops. It was said that 60 German soldiers were killed and 2 civilians injured. So, we're up on the front lines now. Some of the teachers were inside the storehouse that was bombed, but fortunately, none of them were injured. Okay, there's a pause for several days, and then he writes another entries about his sickness. It's the first real illness I've had on this vacation trip. I got it on Sunday the 19th, suddenly and severely, with very strong pain in my stomach and severe diarrhea. I was lying in the heather, twisting and turning like a snake. Monday, I was a little better, but didn't eat. In spite of my better judgment, I ate a little bit on Tuesday, and for a while, thought I was cured. What I had was a piece of herring, and then it started again. I got a high fever Wednesday, and some very uncomfortable days and nights followed. A big bright spot in all this was a letter from Olga, his wife, Monday night. A wonderful little letter with only good news. I really feel how much I love her and the children and my home, and now, here in captivity, I can see how I did not fully value and appreciate the times we could share and be together, working so hard all the time and not really appreciating the good things in living. I feel now that I will and can be a better human being after this, and I feel sympathy with everybody who's suffering, everybody who's a prisoner or a soldier, and there are many of them who are in the war against their own will. My sympathy for suffering people increases. Their lives are as valuable as ours, and I experience a feeling of rebellion stronger than ever against the insanity of war. Birthdays were celebrated. On July 26th, I was at an anniversary party for Svada. That's one of his pals from baseball. Pleasant, and there were speeches. I gave a speech. My grandfather was a known speech maker. In fact, in this book, he's mentioned only twice. In one of those, it was in the capacity of, he was elected in charge of the speech making, where the teachers, when they could, they would talk about different, these are teachers, you know, barracks full of teachers, and they were talking about educational topics. Like the first one that was referred to was one of the professors, a geography guy, was talking about North Norway. Welcome to North Norway. Yesterday was another Sunday. I spent the whole day in my sleeping bag with a fever, didn't eat anything, a strong pain in my stomach during the night, and it came from the inflammation of the colon. The pills that you sent along with me, Olga, helped a great deal. Sunday morning, the pain was almost gone, and the following day, also better. Spirits were pretty high in the tent, in spite of the fact that several people had stomach problems. Okay. August 2nd, new month. Our stay here has lasted longer than most of us had expected. Now summer is on its way out, and we are still sitting here. We haven't heard much about our return home, nothing more than the list that the doctors put together. August 13th. Many things have happened here since the last time I wrote. Kirkenes, a Norwegian Nazi official, has given a speech here. And it appears that this is probably another final attempt to win the teachers over. It didn't get too far. But today, money was handed out to the ones that will travel in the first group. ID cards were returned. The weather's better. Hope that will last. It's hard to believe that we're now going to get away from here. Yesterday, I was at a party in Jokser's tent, one of his pals. It was very pleasant. Fresh pollock, liver, coffee, bread, and good butter, in addition to Nordic. Nordic, it's a Norwegian delicacy, cloudberries. Norwegians just go insane for them. I don't really understand why, except that they're so hard to pick that it makes them particularly coveted. I'll take a strawberry or a raspberry anytime. But we have some Norwegians here, maybe could explain the mystique of Nordic. But anyway, it was a big deal to my grandfather. The food is very important under the circumstances which we live here, and companionship and friendship are strengthened through sharing, a memory that will last a long time. August 17th, Sunday, we worked until 12. The weather looked terrible in the morning. There was a cloudburst during the night. After a while, it got lighter, so we didn't get soaked through and through. Otherwise, the day passed like Sundays do. Salden had a 30th wedding anniversary, and it so happened that Fagerwood had got waffles, cookies, and motid as a gift. So we boiled coffee and had a good time. I gave a little speech for him. But today a rather dark mood has been prevailing. Many had expected the travel to start today, but we were still kept in uncertainty. We had a good dinner, fresh pollock that Jakobsen and I had bought. So somehow they, I guess, got their money back, and the officials were letting them buy some stuff from the locals as well. I feel healthier and pretty strong, but I'm bothered by the uncertainty and homesickness. Okay, then this is the last entry. More certain rumors. 143 of us are leaving at the beginning of the next week, and that comes from the commandant, the doctor, and his assistants. Now, I almost believe it. But it is better to take the attitude of a skeptic here, so the disappointment will not be too strong if it does not come about this time either. Otherwise, life is going on here as usual. From Olga, I got, which I think I mentioned, a telegram letter, and that was a great pleasure. Everything is well at home, and that is a big consolation amidst all this uncertainty and waiting. Yesterday we had a birthday celebration in the tent. Coffee with canned milk and crackers. Sandon and I gave speeches for him. One feels strange and strong emotions out here, especially on Sundays and holidays when one has time to collect one's thoughts. Small things can bring with them such strong associations that one has to pull oneself together not to want to cry. Especially memories from childhood days, home, and the ones that are dear to you, streaming forth so strong that it takes strength not to become sentimental. In our present situation, we are very receptive to that type of emotion. That's the last one. And my grandfather was not amongst the first two groups to go back, and it took him a while to get back. He was on a ship that was bombed on the way back, and apparently there was by the bombardier of the Russian plane, a 2-second timing error, and that kept the bomb from sinking the ship. But the fact is, nothing ever came of the Samband, the plan to get the Riksting. Nothing ever came of that. After the war, my grandfather was reinstated, and he was selected to be the rector, the principal of the school where the Nazi principal was kicked out. My dad has a picture of him getting hustled into the back of a truck to be imprisoned. He served a prison term, and we've also got a picture of my grandfather giving the 17th of May speech in Eidsvoll in 1945, just a couple weeks after Norway was free. And anyway, when Åsa asked me to come back here, she gave me pretty free rein to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. And well, my father's story, which some of you have heard, is more personal, and my uncle's story, which I've also told here, he was arrested and sent to Poland, and he has one of those, amazing stories where he should have died several times over, and it's really dramatic. I feel my grandfather's story is the most important, and it's not well known. And I had heard that he had been arrested, but I remember in college I was thumbing through a book on nonviolence, about Gandhi-like nonviolence, and the teachers' protest in Norway was held as an example of successful nonviolence. And so I've wanted to find out more about it since then. And I think it's, in this time, it's just a message that resonates with me that I like to do justice. It is an example of citizens taking direct personal responsibility for their society and doing something about it. And anyway, questions?
Yeah. Do you have a figure on the percentage of the population collaborating with the Germans?
I've heard different things. 2-3%. There were definitely. The word Quisling is taken from Vidkun Quisling, the main Norwegian collaborator, and that was standard Norwegian language. It's different in different regions, but yeah, there were definitely collaborators. But the majority of the teachers and Norwegian populace were against it.
Did your father hear any stories from his father about how he strategically kept this diary? What did he write it on? Where did he hide it, and how he got it?
Don't know a thing. I don't think it was like the prison camp of the movies where he had the special secret compartment in the floor. It just seemed like they gave him a fair amount of leeway up there. So no, I don't know a thing about it. Yeah.
It is this Quisling, that name is so well known now. To describe it. What was he trained at? What he did?
I don't know much about. Somebody want to answer that? The question is,
Yeah.
Vidkun Quisling. What was he trained as?
Quisling had been a defense minister in Norway in the 30s, and he personally met with Adolf Hitler December 14th, 1939, or 38 or 39, and urged Hitler to attack Norway, invade Norway, take over Norway, so the German ships could have the naval bases of Norway to attack England and so forth and so on. So he personally met with Hitler. It was December 14th, I think it was 39, it might have been 38. I think it was 39. But it was that month and day, and he personally urged Hitler to attack Norway.
This is Leif Terdal, and he has written a book. I'll have it up here, you can check it out. I went to a presentation he gave at Norse Hall last month.
What's the name of the book?
The book is called Our Escape from Nazi-Occupied
And
Norway.
you wrote that?
I wrote the book.
He wrote the book, and in fact, he escaped as a small child.
On a fishing boat.
On a fishing boat. And so in this account, he describes there's an account written by his mother of that escape. And then he also puts the Norwegian invasion and the occupation in context. And you can see, anyway, he's done a lot of research. He's written a book about it, where he does span the personal story along with the big picture. And it's a nice job. I've read a lot about different snippets, but I like the way he tied it all together. So,
What happened quickly after peace came?
he was shot. He was tried and shot. There weren't very many who were shot after the war, but he was one of them. Other questions?
That officer, okay.
Oh, go ahead. What's up?
That officer who lived in your parents' house, did they just were there other families that had German officers and Germans living in the homes? So did he just, how did he get there?
He was placed, they had room. I don't know much about it. And I don't know how long he was there. I assume they had to feed him. They had meal times. I can imagine I can imagine the stone cold silence of it. There's a question up here.
Did his barracks and detention companions keep diaries also?
There were a number of them, and some of them are cited here. There are a lot of pictures that were drawn up there. So clearly, my grandfather was not the only one. So there's, I don't know of them compiled, and there isn't much on the internet, but there's a lot here in this book. Yes?
How long was he away from home?
I think he was arrested April 1st, and he got back in November. So, however many months that is.
May I add a little bit about whistling?
Sure.
He is, in my book, a fascinating person. He grew up in the same community as my mother did, Fylliksdal in Telemark. He was brilliant as a young man. He beat every record academically up to grades, including the War Academy. He graduated there with fantastic grades.
That's
and I hope you agree with
No, that's
me.
correct. That's correct.
And then he also he signed up with Fridtjof Nansen and went to the Soviet Union during the famine in Ukraine, and lived in the Soviet Union for, was it 9 years or 11 years or something like that, and came back from there and hating the communism intensely. But what's also fascinating about Quisling is that after he became prominent as leader of the National Samling, he never seemed to write anything coherent. He could not give good speeches. It was like his mind had fallen to pieces.
That was a good thing.
Other questions? Yeah.
Did your father ever comment about how your grandfather interacted once he got home with his wife? Was he maybe a little bit more demonstrative? Because he was so now acutely aware of how dear that family was? Did he ever say anything?
I haven't heard that, but I'll put it to him that way. I don't know, because yeah, we heard that's a part that I really resonated. I mean, it comes out strong in the diary is that, if I ever get back, boy, things will be different.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine. I didn't know him very well. He was a very old man.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes?
You mentioned that Russia had some influence in liberating Norway. Did they leave any imprint in Norway after the war? You know, like they did in Germany, you know, half of it.
Not that I know of. I'm maybe somebody here knows questions, can answer that question more. I know that you know, there weren't big raging battles between the Russians and the Norwegians like they feared, because at the end of the war, the Germans thought the invasion was going to come through Norway. Even after Normandy, they thought that Normandy might just be a feint and they would go through the north. And so there were you know, tons of troops. Was it 350,000 troops?
German troops?
Yeah.
Yes.
Something like that after the war. And as Professor Terje Leiden said at University of Washington, if the Germans decided to dig in and fight the Allies in Norway, they'd still be fighting there today. He said that in the 80s, I guess. But, another question.
Do you know if there's a museum or some other sort of institutionalized way of communicating this history of peaceful resistance to the present and future Norwegians?
Not that I know of. There isn't much of a presence about it on the net, and you think it would be there. I mean, there are a number of museums. The one I'm most familiar with is the one in Oslo, the Resistance Museum, and there's also
Okay, so there's one there.
yes,
Okay.
and they have an account of this there. And I guess I'll conclude by putting, if you Google my grandfather's name, you can read this account. It's on a website called Info Norway. So if you Google Edvard Brakstad, you can, I think that I did it this afternoon. The third thing that comes up is an account that my father and I put together. And also at the same site, there's my father's account with pictures from his experience during the war. Any other questions?
You can also ask questions in the afterwards.
Is that allowed this time?
Yes. This